Welcome to FOBtv, the future of business. I'm your host, Kevin Benedict, and I want to thank each of you for joining us today. Back with us today is my guest, Ved Sen, for part 2 of this interview. Ved, thanks for joining us.
Nice to be back, Kevin. Looking forward to more of our conversation.
Absolutely. So Ved is responsible for digital strategy, innovation, and acceleration at TCS. He's also the author of the book, Doing Digital, Connect, Quantify, and Optimize. We're so excited to have you back, Ved. And we had an interview last week. We didn't get through half the things we wanted to talk about, so we made an arrangement to get back together today. So Ved, let me just jump right into today's topic, and we're really going to be focusing in on innovation. My first question for you today is, there's this notion of combinatorial technology, combining a lot of different technologies, and you can have 100 different technologies, but you can combine them like Legos in all kinds of different ways. And so what that means is you have this huge opportunity to innovate in all kinds of different ways. How does a company even begin to prioritize and optimize how to innovate and where they should innovate, Ved?
So my view of that, Kevin, is always to start with the problem. We get into a lot of conversations with clients where the question is, how can we use augmented reality, for example? And I'm always saying, well, perhaps the right question to ask is not how do we use augmented reality, but put that to one side and let's talk about, what are your top 5 problems? And then we can, whether it's augmented reality or whether it's automation or AI or some other, latest and greatest technology that can actually solve that problem. So I think the first thing to remember in innovation from my perspective is to always be problem focused. It's always used to ask also the question, what's this problem worth? It's nice to have a great conversation about technology, but if the problem is not worth solving and it's not putting the dollar signs behind it, then for the organization to spend a lot of time thinking about it perhaps isn't right. So be clear about what problem it is, how important or how big a problem it is, and then we can think about which technologies. If you lay out all your problems, and you may see that actually there is a strong incidence of, let's say, robotics on a lot of them, and maybe then an organization as a company, you might say, well, in these 2 areas, it looks like we've got so many different problems to solve that we should bring some internal competence inside because it's fundamental to the business. A simple example would be how a bank might think about cybersecurity. It is clearly fundamental to the bank's everyday operations, so it's not something you want to completely outsource. So you then have this choice of those 20% of the technologies that you really want to major in, and those become your core pieces that you want to build internal competence. Everything else, I think you should kind of outsource. And increasingly what we are finding is there is a vibrant startup environment. Most large organizations who are our partners as well, large product companies, have also built very strong but very open innovation models. So I think the ability for us to mix and match technologies is more than ever before at this point. We at TCS have built some interesting things like a data marketplace or an API marketplace where you can just transact on data or just functionality without having to build anything. And I think those are the most amazing things because we don't have to have a technology conversation. We're really, from an innovation perspective, we're really having a problem-solving conversation, which is what I love.
Oh, that's beautiful. Ved, just in the last few days, I've been working with an organization that says, look, we have more ideas than we know what to do with. Our challenge is, how do we actually innovate at scale? This isn't just one little POC or proof of concept that we want to do. This is dozens and dozens and dozens across our organization. What kind of advice would you give a client that says we really need to just crank up our ability to innovate at scale?
So let me answer that in 2 ways. That's a fascinating question because it has 2 different axes. The first one is, as you were saying, that if it's not about building a proof of concept, it's building a proof of concept every week, perhaps. And that's the kind of scale we want. The other scaling challenge we see a lot of is, I would argue that today, especially with the kind of technologies and tools we've got, I think most organizations have solved the problem of how to get to proof of concept. Half a dozen smart people in a room, get a few full stack technologists, some designers, a couple of commercial guys, and they will build a proof of concept. It's no longer a dark art. It doesn't need magic. But where we are seeing the challenge is, out of every 100 proof of concepts that are built, maybe half a dozen are going on to scale. So the hit rate of proof of concepts to actual scale products is also still very low. So you've got both these kinds of scaling challenges. Let me take them one by one. The first one, I think, is a more straightforward one, because that's really, if you start using things like low code, TCS offers some really interesting factory models for innovation, where we go, we talk to clients about how we can kind of churn these proof of concepts. Because if you think about it, if the magic is not in the proof of concept anymore, then why spend so much time and energy, generating these very carefully crafted POCs? If they are going to be quick affairs where you really want to test one part of the technology or one part of the product, then we can do them at scale by creating teams that can churn through a bunch of them. And I'm going to say something that's kind of almost contravening what I've just said. Bear with me. I think the path to scale for individual POCs is an interesting one, because what we're seeing is there are typically three challenges we see most organizations face: technological, financial, and culture. The tech problem is all about, I built a POC on throwaway tech, and I can't figure out whether on what technology I built living, breathing solution on. The answer there is, as best as possible in today's world, we can actually adopt platforms, because you get essentially SaaS models. So you don't have to pay for a bunch of tech. You pay for what you consume if possible. Then you kind of don't reinvent the technology question at a later point of time. The finance question is an interesting one, the commercial one, because a lot of times what we see is clients go through a POC and the POC does well, everyone's happy, but no one quite knows whether they can sustain the business case. And someone has to spend $1 million for the MVP. There isn't clarity about whether it'll work or not. So the answer there perhaps is to make sure that you do that homework upfront. And if your business case rests on a critical factor, let's say conversion of trial to buy, for example, make sure that it actually is baked into your proof of concept. Don't just make the POC a technology POC. Truly test the concept. And if the concept depends on conversion, then test the conversion, because at least you'll get the data point that then will feed into your business case for the next bit of expenditure. And then the third piece is culture, which is where we go back to, depending on how breakthrough or different, disruptive the new product or idea is, it may get swallowed and killed by your existing culture, because it's too threatening. And you know what happens to ideas inside large organizations. So that's where you've got to think about, how do we shepherd this new idea from its infancy through to a point where it can live and breathe on its own. And I think that's where we've got some ideas around, offering things like startup as a service models, where we're talking to clients about saying, look, we'll help you not just build something, which we can of course do because we're a tech company, but can we help you actually ring fence this idea and provide a layer of services and skills that will make sure that it doesn't get swallowed by the antibodies in your organization that are going to fight this alien new idea and will effectively either kill it or it'll come out looking like something that is no different from what the company already has. So these three things I think are very fundamental, and I think we can solve them, but we see a lot of our clients struggling with these three things as well a lot.
So recently, Ved, I had a client ask me, for innovation here, it's not like we have people sitting on the bench ready to do innovation. How should we, in fact, organize our efforts within our organization to actually innovate? What kind of advice would you have for a company there?
I think that question has become fundamental in the world that we live in today, because I think that question of do we have people sitting around doing innovation was a very valid question maybe 5 years ago. But as the world lurches into more and more uncertainty, that isn't just a bunch of people sitting around. It's actually, it may be the guys building the bridge to your survival. It has become much more central to, I think, senior management thinking as well. The structure question is an interesting one because there isn't one answer, of course. That lots of organizations have tried different things. Some people have tried setting up a separate company. Some people have tried engaging with startups and acquiring or investing in them and kind of treating them as options. Some people have tried to build things internally. Some people have made it a part of their entire transformational effort. I think the factors that decide how you should go do depend on what is your existing organization culture. What is your what are you trying to do with your innovation piece? Is it something that's a completely new product with a new business model? We're talking to clients every other day where they're trying to build new products. And I think it's something that's very interesting that's happening right now in the market is in every industry, there are a couple of clients who want to build the next generation of products for their industry, which is kind of infused with technology. Effectively, they're becoming, in a way, our competitors. Although, we don't do, and in the UK, of course, we don't do any work with Bosch, but Bosch is a good example of a company that started life as a parts manufacturer for machinery and equipment, but today is a very leading IoT platform provider. Right? Siemens is another one. Engineering to, Philips has gone from consumer products to health tech. So in each industry, you can almost add the tech prefix or suffix to a company. And you were a construction company, now you're a construction tech company. You are a pharma company or a pharma tech company. And there'll always be those companies that will become the tech providers. So we're seeing a lot of interest in those organizations who want to partner us to kind of build a joint proposition that will help them take these technology principles and products to market. Now, these will require a different business model, a different operating model, and a whole different stack to sustain and support this. It's not your traditional IT. So in that environment, you probably want to set up as a separate entity and give it its own governance. We've done the reverse. Yeah. So just like we have at TCS, we have Digitate, which is our AI product organization, and they were set up as a separate company to build and launch the Ignio product, because we, as in the main, are a services company, and it's important that if this piece has a different business and operating model, then they should be set up as a separate company. So back to your point, if you're setting something up that requires a different operating model and a different business model, it's probably wise to give it its own governance and at least put it on the path to becoming a separate entity. If it's simply a new product or a new extension of an existing product or an extension of a market, which will not significantly reshape your operating along with all your other innovation efforts. So it is an element of marginal versus disruptive, and it's an element of how different the business model is for this new innovation.
Absolutely. Well, Ved, I want to thank you so much for sharing your insights. And I know you and I are experiencing some of the same observations and confusion and just trying to figure out how to make progress in a crazy world that we live. So with that, Ved, I want to thank you so much for part 1 and part 2 of your thoughts and sharing those with all of us today.
Thank you, Kevin. Let me end by asking you, let's do a kind of a contest, if you will.
Yes.
What's your best bet of when you will next come to London?
Oh boy, I would say April of 2021. So what's that going to be? About 8 months from now, I think, before the comfort level and both comfort level probably on a personal side and comfort level within TCS as an organization, that they're ready to start sending this out. So that would be my guess. Yeah. How does that align with your forecast?
You're probably a little bit more optimistic than I am. I mean, having just done a journey, I guess personally my confidence has weirdly gone up because I've done a couple of long journeys and it feels doable. But I think that it'll be summer before. So I'm thinking August next year before we can actually, with the blessing of
a year from now.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, got it. We'll see who's right. We'll get back together. And one of us will buy the other a pint. How's that?
I will look forward to that.
Thank you, Ved.
Take care.